Welcome to episode 4 of Concord Stories entitled English Settlers. I am Jim Sherblom and my co-host is
Belyazid.
In 1630, John Winthrop, newly appointed governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, decided to make his capital at Boston, on the site of the former indigenous village of Charlotte. It is likely that Blackston introduced Winthrop to Wabin, who in turn most likely introduced Winthrop to his stepmother, Sansqua of Mystique. In any case, we know from the written records that Sansqua was negotiating with Winthrop in 1630, and that she didn't speak English, nor he Algonquin, so it's highly probable that Wabin was the initial translator between them. In 1635, Blackston sold his land to the Puritan leaders and moved 35 miles southwest of Boston, changing his name to Blackstone to make his home among the indigenous Pawtucket people along what is now called the Blackstone River Valley.
These English religious emigrants included craftspeople, merchants, fur traders, land speculators, shopkeepers, and farmers. They included freemen, serfs, indentured servants, and their families. Simon Willard, born in 1605 and horse-monded in the county of Kent, was prominent among them. His father had 3 wives consecutively and 10 children. Simon was a younger son of the second wife. He and a younger son whose mother had died, his prospects were severely restricted. As the son of a wealthy Puritan merchant, his religious beliefs would block many possibilities in England. This ambitious young man became a trader of goods, a merchant, and a Kentish soldier. In his early 20s, he married a local teenager, Mary Sharpie, and they would soon have 2 daughters. By 1634, this young man and his family, including 2 of his siblings, found their way to New England. He risked life and limb to build a home and make his fortune in the wilderness. Over time, this proved to be a risky but profitable endeavor.
In 1630, 17 ships brought 1,000 settlers. By 1640, 20,000 more would follow. Most of them initially clustered in former villages of the Massachusetts indigenous people along the shore. William Wood, however, had visited the colony in 1633, and in 1634 had published a description of the region called New England's Prospect that identified the recently abandoned indigenous Massachusetts people village at Mesquitequid as ideal for a new colonial village. It was 20 miles from the coastal towns, deep in indigenous territory, well beyond the newly settled village of Watertown, which was the nearest garrison of the colonial militia. In terms of topography, meadows and waters, it may have also roughly resembled Odell, England, which is where the Buckley family came from.
In 1634, Simon and Mary Willard and their 2 young daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, had settled in Boston. Simon immediately established himself as a person of means in this small colony. Simon had military training, having risen to the level of captain in the Kentish militia, so was quickly recruited into a leadership role in the new colonial militia. In March 1637, he was commissioned a lieutenant commandant and would serve in the military roles the rest of his life. He bought a newly built house on 100 acres of land in a section of town called Brighton. Willard soon met his not very distant neighbor, Wabin, and through him met Wabin's father-in-law, Tehottawan, to begin trading. Willard became a trader in furs, particularly beaver fur, and in 1641 was granted a colonial monopoly on trading in these furs with the indigenous people.
Edward, Peter Buckley's eldest son, was born in Odell, England in 1614, when his father was 32 and his mother 27. Edward was 12 when his mother died, which appears to have greatly impacted his life trajectory and sense of self. Edward was 20 and studying for the ministry at St. Catherine's College in Cambridge, England, when his father remarried. About that time, perhaps in response to his father's remarriage, Edward emigrated to Boston in 1634, where he was admitted to First Church Boston as a single man. Thus, when his father, Reverend Peter Buckley, was banned from preaching and needed to emigrate, young Edward had already paved the way and prepared for the family to join him. Yet Edward always felt more attached to his birthplace in Odell. That was his true home, more than he would regard this new home in the wild wilderness.
Peter and Grace Buckley arrived in Boston on the Susan and Ellen in 1635, along with 4 of his sons, Thomas, who was 18, John, who was 15, George, who was 11, and Daniel, who was 9. Reverend Bulkley was among the best educated, most respected, and wealthiest Puritan clergymen to yet arrive in the small colony. Reverend Bulkley had been at college with the Boston minister John Cotton, who was a lifelong friend, so the Bulkley family was welcomed into the colonial elite. Early on, he used his high theological standing to help his old friend Cotton navigate a major antinomian crisis. As a second wife, Grace appears to have not enjoyed the same level of affection from her morose and scholarly husband as he had expressed for his first wife, Jane. But she managed their family life.
Peter Bulkeley brought 6,000 pounds of capital, equal to about $12 million today, making Bulkeley one of the wealthiest men in the colony. Thomas Dane, a master carpenter, agreed to pay for his passage by serving as Bulkeley's indentured servant, and over the years built the Bulkleys several large houses, barns, and a grist mill in Concord. Over the next 7 years, Grace gave birth to 4 more children, Gershom, Eliza, Dorothy, and Peter. It appears families from his Odell congregation had traveled with them or came about the same time by another route. Willard heard Bulkeley preach in Newtown, soon to be renamed Cambridge, and was so taken by his doctrines and style of preaching, and Willard needed a senior partner to validate and help finance his land acquisition schemes, so that he proposed that they join their lots together in seeking a colonial land grant to settle the Musquetaquid River Valley to be their home in the wilderness.
In September 1635, they petitioned the General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony to grant them the right to settle a town on the site of the former indigenous people's village alongside the Musquetaquid River, which was readily granted. By order of the General Court on September 3, 1635, it is ordered that there shall be a plantation at Musquetaquid, and that there be 6 miles of land square belonging to it, and that the inhabitants thereof shall have 3 years' immunities from all public charges except trainings. It appears the first group of Concord settlers moved into the wilderness in 1636, including Reverend John Jones and his large family. But Reverend Bulkeley appears to have continued to reside in Cambridge. Bulkeley immediately became a respected and much sought-after religious and spiritual leader of this new Puritan theocracy.
These cultures represented vastly different ways of being human, but much of what happened derived from their cultural worldviews, their susceptibility to contagious diseases, expectations about a contingent afterlife, and the neurological impact of literacy on relational orientation. Death was a constant presence, with most of Sunsquaw's family dying between 1616 and 1636, and half of Bulkeley's children dying during the same period. Diseases came in waves and were poorly understood, leaving much room for personal interpretations of what was from God and what was evil. This is a story of multiple cultures trying to flourish. Some adapted, others couldn't. There were both blessings and suffering as our story unfolds over hundreds of years. This is Reverend Dr. Jim Sherblom.
And I, Belyazid, reminding us that honestly telling our authentic stories helps us to better understand the world and our place in it. As Concord prepares for our Concord 250 celebration, it is time to tell our stories in a new way.